Thank you, Pooja, for that introduction. And I wish to thank Team I.T.S for making me part of this. It was a real pleasure to hear Professor Agarwal's comments on the new education policy, lots of practical stuff, and Professor Jagdish Kumar's highlights of the big issues. And therefore, in a sense, I will build on what they have already said. I've known Professor Agarwal for a long time, and I know of Professor Jagdish Kumar for a while, and it was a pleasure to hear that he was a postdoctoral at the University of Waterloo, and I was a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Western Ontario, London. London, Waterloo, very close by. We used to go to Waterloo ever so often to hear lectures, and Waterloo is a leading thing in at least computers, right from the earlier days of What4 compiler for Fortran to now the latest in quantum computing. University of Waterloo has been a leader. Because time is short, I will come straight to the point, and I will tell you a series of stories and ideas. One key thing that I want to say, and this is started from the deliberations, is that we are not going to be adopters of something which has been laid down in a policy. And Professor Agarwal said this very clearly, that some things are laid down to great specificity and people just follow them. Rather, higher education institutions show the path forward. So when we talk about IITs and other leading institutions, they showed what the IITs were created when there was no major, it was not an outcome of a policy deliberation. It was the outcome of an initiative. But that apart, I'd like to catch on the link by Professor Agarwal's story about Einstein and the question paper that he repeated to the students. So the story is, as he said, that Einstein was at the Institute of Advanced Study in Princeton, and he gave a question paper to his students. And this is a story of about 1905. So no computers, no photocopiers, nothing. So he gave this question paper to his teaching assistant, and he was supposed to make copies of it, distribute to the students, and cut back and give it to the answer scripts to Professor Einstein. And when he saw that it was exactly the same questions, he started wondering whether Einstein has gone senile or become old or whatever. He rushed to the professor and said, these are exactly the same questions you gave to the same students last year. How can you do it? And Einstein is said to have answered that you are right. The questions are the same, but the answers have changed. And what I want to draw upon is in terms of education context. The questions are still the same. And in fact, Professor Agarwal very clearly brought out why the old model of expansion is not the right model. This is what Einstein was saying. The question is, what is it? What do we teach? How do we teach? How do we teach it to large number? How do we increase the GER? And so on. But the answers are not that we will create one college per week, one university per day, one faculty per evening, etc., etc. And that is why it's a very good starting point. So let me get back a little more into the detail. So when Einstein said this in 1905, and he said this with great confidence, it is because Einstein had himself published 4 major papers in physics in that year. It's called, in journal Annalen Physik, it's called Memorabilis for him. One was on the theory of Brownian movement. One was on the photoelectric effect, for which he got a Nobel Prize. One was for the special theory of relativity, and one was for the mass energy equivalence, E is equal to mc squared. And therefore, he himself knew that he's changing physics. The answers are no longer the same. And it was not only he, around him, Max Born, Max Planck, Schrodinger, Heisenberg, all these were changing physics. And it is very important, and I want to draw attention of all the education. We are changing education right now. Almost similar. So those laws of Newton and Maxwell, etc., stood for 300 years. And then they found that certain domains, they don't work. So ultraviolet radiation, photoelectric effect, all these things could not be explained. And as Professor Agarwal said so, that the challenges we have to education cannot be solved by the old quote-unquote Newtonian methods. So whether you talk about Woods dispatch or Kothari Commission or Radhakrishnan Commission or Mudaliar Commission or whatever, all that changes, and especially including this 2020 policy is in that borderline area. The ideas belong to the future, but if you're going to implement it in the same way, it will not be possible. So this is one very important thing. So I want to then look at what Professor Jagdish Kumar said as a very important thing. This is the key feature. So very often we say, what is the key feature of a certain thing? And the key feature is that we want to prepare people for the knowledge society. And we want to have India as a leader in the knowledge society. And now once we look at that, we don't have to replicate the previous situation that we had. So one of the very important things of a knowledge society is that the raw product is information. What you do is information processing, and what you create are information products. If you look at the big companies today, they're no longer about oil, etc. They're about all knowledge, and even the so-called engineering looks with software inside. And this is where the point about creativity, which was emphasized by both Professor Agarwal and Jagdish Kumar, becomes very important. Our model so far was to curb any creativity. You should not think anything of your own. And you should be very good in complying with what is written. And the better you are in rote learning, the better you are as an asset. So I have no hesitation saying I was a good student. So I can still tell you that pi is 3.14159.265, log pi is 4972, square root 2 is 1.414, square root 3 is 1.732, and so many formulas and equations without looking at anything. That is what we were expected to do. But now what people are saying, okay, you said pi is 3.14, I have got it to 33 places. Now that we know the value of pi, what can we do with it? And this is where, again, Professor Jagdish Kumar and Professor Agarwal talked about the innovation part. I want to share with you now what are the features which changed. The first feature which has changed, and in some sense, Professor Jagdish Kumar averted to it in a specific case of the incubator for children. One thing that has happened and got unnoticed is that the lifespan has increased. From 1947 to now, there is an average of 30 years increase in the lifespan of people. This is very important because this is a completely new area of education. And I have no hesitation saying I have senior colleagues of mine who have drawn pension for more years than they drew salary. So they joined IIT as a professor at the age of 40. They worked for 20 years, retired at 60. Now they're 85 and above, still going strong, still giving lectures, still teaching people. And they've drawn pension for more years than they drew salary. And therefore, the word which was used in passing to me becomes center stage. To me, the future is about lifelong learning. And school, college, university are all preparations for lifelong learning. And therefore, it has to be seen as a continuum, not the stage of 3 years, 2 years, 4 years, etc., but the stage of continuum in lifelong learning. Similarly, the other important thing that has been said in the education policy is the continuum across subjects. In the pre-computer age, pre-knowledge age, pre-textbook age, see, we are the ones who grew up when the Eastern edition of textbooks available cheaply, otherwise textbooks were also unavailable. Therefore, you had compartmentalization. Because how would you give people access to all these kind of resources if there were very different kinds of things? So we had narrow specialization. So physics, chemistry, math, 8 subjects. We also had a kind of hidden priority in the subjects and so on. Today, we are talking of integration across, and this is very interesting. Integration does not mean you give him a course on BSc physics and also BSc psychology and this is integrated. No, this is going to be like grafting of organic bodies. When you graft an organ, it won't be accepted by you. So grafting of subjects won't happen. At the molecular level, at the basic conceptual level, you will have to understand the subjects. So what does it mean to know psychology? What does it mean to know mathematics? What does it mean to know physics? What does it mean to know history? And understanding the core concepts. So you have history and physics. Just now, Professor Jagdish Kumar talked about that famous thing, that the CCD with which we all take selfie is actually coming out because of the Nobel Prize winning work of somebody on CCDs. Now, that person has no idea that this will be used for taking selfies by people. He is doing it to answer a selfie. This is the second important point. And Professor Agarwal also referred to it. He referred to one aspect of it. I want to refer to the complete story. Now, in the knowledge economy, two very interesting things are happening and simultaneously. So very often we see like two opposite things happening simultaneously. One is what is called the usefulness of useless knowledge. So actually the Institute of Advanced Study President, Founder, Director, Abraham Flexner has a book on it, has a talk on it, a TED talk on it, the usefulness of useless knowledge. And he begins with Marconi and so on. But more recently, you know that in the last couple of years, we have found things which are purely theoretical have become practical and routine. I talked about selfie. Does any selfie taker realize that he's doing this based on a CCD device? So when we were at the university level, only people like us knew what is a laser. light amplification through stimulated emission of radiation. Ordinary person had no idea what is a laser, what is a maser, what is all this, even microwave. Only people specializing in electronics will learn of microwave. Today, microwave oven is everywhere. Every kitchen has a microwave oven. It has an induction cooker. Who learned about induction? Only those who were doing physics, Lenz's law, electromagnetic induction would have any idea what is an induction thing. And even today, many people will not know how microwaves really work. So what is now happening is more and more what was considered useless knowledge is becoming practical knowledge, and I will venture to say it is becoming critical knowledge. Now, you've been hearing in the news all the time, cyber security and cyber this thing and hacking and so on. Now, one of the key principles of cyber security is a pure abstract thing which nobody, even when we were studying mathematics, we were not studying number theory, prime numbers and the properties of prime numbers and so on. But your entire security today is based on prime numbers. So RSA algorithm is an algorithm where you use two large prime numbers, multiply them, then use them for encoding and so on. And this is seen as practically unbreakable in reasonable time. So what hackers do, they use other social engineering methods. They try to guess a password, they try to do something, but they're not actually breaking the encryption. But this is actually Professor Jagdish Kumar's field, but as quantum computing becomes bigger, Peter Shor already has an algorithm from 1996, which can factorize a large number. We don't have practical computers which can do that today. So we have at the most the same. But everybody is working on it. So there's a parallel mission going on that when quantum computers are there, what kind of cryptography will we use? And another purely mathematical concept called lattice cryptography is being investigated. So people are looking at the mathematical properties of lattices and how finding the shortest vector, etc., can be used for security in future, because in 10 to 15 years, that's prime factor thing would have been a solved problem. So you will have to look for something new. So we are getting this thing, the usefulness of useless knowledge is becoming within reach. Equally, as Professor Agarwal said, the uselessness of useful knowledge is also becoming very fast. So especially all of us who are in IT have seen how it happens. So my first language which I learned was Fortran. At that time, it was Fortran and COBOL. And then you see the number of languages which came. In AI, it was Lisp and Prolog and so on. And then we had various other things. We fought so much about Pascal, whether we should teach Pascal or not. Pascal is the structured language, this, that. And now all those are dead, and we're talking about today about Python as the most common, etc. This is also seen in hardware as Moore's law of exponential growth of technology. And this Moore's law is also happening in allied fields. So what we have is a very funny thing. We have a very rapid rate of change which has never been seen before. And people who do not understand the exponential function don't understand this at all, because they're used to linear thing. Linear thing may be very steep, less steep, whatever, but the idea of exponential growth in technology, ability, capability is completely sort of, unbelievable for most people. And why I'm driving you towards this is that this is what the future is about. So all the challenges which looked unsurmountable will be seen as solvable. Once we start adopting that and making it, what is happening? Education is working in a linear thing. The world is going in an exponential way. It cannot work. So education also has to transform exponentially. And this is where the pushes will start coming. And I will now go back to the role of the teacher, which I think is central. I am saying this for a while, nobody quite believes me, but educators will be the most important people in the next decade or next decades. And I say this, most don't agree. They think that teachers is not important. And nobody today agrees that teachers are the most important, although we all attribute progress to a few people who made the new things, who made the discoveries, who made the innovations, who did this, and educators who taught people how to use them. And I will share with you in an anecdotal way. So when I was in school level thing, we were taught simple machines. So simple machines were inclined plane, lever, the pulley, sometimes the corkscrew, and so on. And my elder brother, who was going for engineering, I learned that he's going to learn about machines that make machines. That was very interesting for me, very, overwhelming. And now we know the car factory, a TV factory, all these things are machines that make machines. this is what I want to say, and people should understand. As Professor Agarwal said, educators are not those who transact a curriculum. Educators are first lifelong learners themselves, and they create other lifelong learners. Just like a machine creates other machines, educators create other learners and educators. And learner and educator is like a Mobius strip. It's not two different sides. It is the same thing going across. What you know, you have learned. What you have learned and you're sharing with others is it. Feynman had a very famous method. He said, if you really want to know whether you know something, try teaching it to somebody. Only when you, and we all know this. We all know this, that when we learn to pass an exam. When we teach to communicate this to the others, and we don't know what is going to be asked. So that is why teaching is always a better preparation. But these are not two sides. This is continuum, especially when we talk about lifelong learning. Now, we were talking here, and there were so many interesting things on which I can take on, but I also don't want to exceed the time. I want to sort of conclude by drawing your attention to the fact that the educators who will be the most important educators will be those who will use AI as part of their teaching learning strategy. And I want to kind of wrap up by drawing your attention. As I said, higher education institutions have to take the lead. We have Professor Chancellor amongst us, Professor Chancellor and Vinay Pathak, who is Vice Chancellor. They have together created, to my mind, the first time in engineering education in India that all engineers must have this AI awareness course. Same idea, advanced preparation for the future. You're not going to wait for NEP to say that you must all learn AI if you want to be an engineer. So they've gone ahead and created an awareness course for all, no matter what branch, because you will see every branch being affected by it. And another thing that they did, which is a very interesting, is they created a chatbot for queries for things related to the university. Now, what I'm trying to say now is, and Professor Jagdish Kumar talked about, ideas coming as crisscross of various things. So you must have heard that China recently achieved quantum supremacy. Google achieved quantum supremacy in October 2009. So I have created a term called AI in education supremacy, AI and ed supremacy. So John Preskill from Caltech in 2012 had this conceptual thing. Nothing was in sight. He said, one day there will be a quantum computer which will do tasks which no classical computer can do. And Google talked about it. And this is I'm talking AI and ed supremacy as exactly that there will be a time when using AI technologies, a good educator, the educator that I talked about, will be able to do what no other educator has been able to do before. And this is where what Professor Agarwal said, that the challenges which have been unmet and look like it will take 20 years, but you don't have 40 years. Every year, if things are changing, how can you do that? So AI and ed supremacy is the goal that we have to take, and we have seen motivated people doing that. And I just want to share with you very quickly. So already we've seen this virtual conference. You also know holographic technology is now available. So if you really like a holographic professor in front of you, that will be available. Microsoft has a very good demo of how a holograph can teach in any language. So all the thing in the NEP about various languages, etc., will go into automated mode. What is even more interesting is Microsoft has patented a technology where they can create a chatbot of a person who's no longer alive. So from the things that he said and he wrote and he talked about when he was alive, they're able to create a chatbot which will, so you can now have a professor who never retires. So you could really, and imagine that you're hearing and learning things right from them. Even with today's technology, just the YouTube, etc. If I wanted to know what viruses, I'm able to hear David Baltimore's lectures himself from Caltech, who's talking about the viruses, their classification, and so on. Last thing which I want to share with you people, and as I think my real insight which I want to share with you, is that the future is about biology. In our age, the progress was from physics, chemistry, material science, glass, silicon, etc., metals, material science, etc. But the future is about biology. Now, protein engineering will be another field. Cell biology and cell engineering is another field. I can go on, and I'm very excited about this thing about biology being the future. You see, we are all born with no teeth. Then we get a set of teeth, and the teeth are for some time, and then at about when you are teenagers, those teeth also go away. We get another set of teeth. But when you get to be my age, and if you lose your teeth, the teeth don't come back again. Now, once you start understanding what is the coding, which says like a cricket match, you will have only 2 innings. But lizards can grow this several times. Alligators can grow this several times. So eventually it is a coding problem. Where is that in the program? Where is the code which says n is equal to 2 and no further? So there you are. But if whole dentist thing will become regrowing. So you can regrow teeth, you can regrow tissue, you can regrow bones, you can regrow several things. So completely different kinds of things are going to happen. This will happen much faster than you imagine. You will have complete, when people are working, a complete liver can be made synthetically. This can be done and so on. So the point about the goal of being a leader, and as I said, educator is different from an expert. I also grew up in this where we thought experts were great and doing fundamental research is the most important thing, innovation, but no. An expert can demonstrate his or her expertise, but an educator can make an expert out of an ignorant person. You see, when a child passes 10+2, comes to professional college, he doesn't know anything. Over the 4 or 5 years, he gets transformed to a doctor, an engineer, a lawyer, an architect, a business person, whatever. Because the educator transforms the ignorant person to an informed person, then a knowledgeable person, and then an expert person. We don't understand this process, but once we have this process, this is where, as AI develops, it will become a better teacher. It may not do all the functions of a great teacher, but it is great assistance to a good teacher. And you should read about it. Professor Ashok Goel, a computer science professor at Georgia Tech, created a teaching assistant called Jill Watson. We talked about Einstein's teaching assistant, which was a human being. Jill Watson is made out of IBM Watson thing. Now, what I'm trying to say is that all teachers will be able to have a teaching assistant to which they can pass all the lower cognitive load. All learners can also have an assistant who will help in guiding them in detail as to what exactly. So when the person is reading something, the AI will tell them, but look at this word ubiquitous is beyond you. So let me tell you what is the meaning of ubiquitous, how does it use, and so on. So everything that you go to a dictionary or a Wikipedia or a Technopedia or this thing to go to, the system itself will tell you, this is not part of what you know, or this is part of what you need to do. Now, a long time back, and this is my concluding sentence, Benjamin Bloom, and mention was made, I think Jatish Kumar made mention to those levels of this thing. Benjamin Bloom in 1984 had a famous paper called the 2 Sigma problem. And he says that why is it normal education, we always get a bell curve? So we get most people with average, few with very good. He said, can we do something so that it's skewed? So that almost everybody knows what it's supposed to be know. And he said that mastery learning and personalization are the 2 things that we implemented will be able to achieve that. Now with the help of AI and educators, we are able to do this thing of getting almost everybody to learn whatever he or she is capable of learning. And again, many people fear that technology will displace teachers. No. As Professor Agarwal said, basically we will be able to do a lot more than we are able to do today. So when you talk about that, either you can have a small class of 10, 20, 30, or you can have a large class of 10,000. We are very clear we are in a situation where you can have 10,000 people who are all taught with personal instruction, personal data-driven teaching to achieve the outcomes which human teachers decide. So it's a great time, wonderful time, and the new education policy has given a way forward, and that is how we should progress. Thank you. Thank you, Pooja.
Thank you, sir.